Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. And in the past 10 months, as everybody, of course, knows and follows, there has been all our attention was focused on ongoing escalation in Karabakh. So obviously, all the talks were mostly focused on that topic. And today, though, we decided to take a bit of a zoomed-out view and look into the more geopolitical dimension, which is hard to overlook anymore, related to everything that's happening in the Caucasus. And thank you for the panelists who joined today. Let me introduce them. So Areg Kochinyan is the president of the Research Center on Security Policy based in Yerevan. Zaur Shiriyev, analyst for South Caucasus at the International Crisis Group, and Laurence Broers, Associate Fellow at the Russia and Eurasia Program at Chatham House. And I'm Philip Gamagelian, Caucasus Edition Editor, been one of the permanent hosts of these webinars. Let me say a couple of words about the format. I'll lead with a few questions that I'll ask the panelists to answer. After that, we'll see if there are any questions to each other, any kind of either questions or comments to each other's talking points. That should take us about 45 minutes, and from there on, we will turn to question and answers. So if you're in the audience and have a question or a comment, please post that clicking the Q&A button in the bottom of the screen. Total we'll try to stay 90 minutes or less. So we should be able to finish by that time. Going directly now to the topic, and I'll start, Laurence, with you. My estimation of this is has been or was rather Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict was one of the conflicts that for a long time the main actors, in that sense Armenia and Azerbaijan, had agency in resolving it. So it had a geopolitical dimension, and yet the voice and the agency of these two actors was pretty central for a long period of time, and at least in some periods. And I'll put 1990s there, as well as at least the period of Dmitry Medvedev presidency, when kind of geopolitical stars aligned, and all the external actors seem to be pushing towards a solution. And that has been a missed opportunity, in my view, at least, to solve this conflict. Things got complicated, more complicated after Putin's return to presidency in 2012 and further. But following 2020 war, starting from 2020 war, rather, I think the conflict acquired completely different look. And the third parties are no longer third parties necessarily. Russia and Turkey are very directly engaged, both militarily and politically. And we have seen activation of Iran. The Western activation is probably unprecedented, at least since Bush presidency. We haven't seen such activity. And of course, we have major developments in the region. So there is ongoing war in Ukraine. There is just started and potentially long-term war in the Middle East that might completely realign again all the relationships and actors. So it's a very unescapable, and now the geopolitics seem to be driving this conflict rather than, in a way, simply influencing. But if I can ask you to comment a bit on the role of this very, again, unprecedented for a long time activation of the West. Is this, as in US and individual European actors, European Union as well, is this something opportunistic and on the periphery of Ukraine war that will change very quickly, let's say, as new crises unfold, as we see now in the Middle East, in your view? Or is this more of a strategic bet by the Western powers? And whichever your answer is, what would be your advice, let's say, or thoughts about how this should impact the calculations and thoughts of the local actors?
Well, thank you, Phil. It's obviously very big questions. As you rightly pointed out, there's been no serious Western engagement with the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict I would argue, since around 2000, 2001. I mean, there were the different pushes by the different countries of the Minsk group troika, but nothing on the level that we saw in the run-up to the Key West talks that followed. As you highlighted, one way to see the outcomes in 2020 is this process of what I call regionalization, taking a conflict out of a multilateral mediation format that is directed at resolving that conflict according to international principles and laws, and re-embedding it in a regional power system, a conflict management system that is run by the regional powers according to their interests. It seemed that this regionalization dynamic in 2020 was unstoppable, inexorable. Western powers were largely sidelined. And then they made a comeback from December 2021, first meeting in Brussels, and the EU invested considerable, I would say, political capital in this effort to mediate between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I think what we've seen in the last 3 weeks is really, I don't know whether it's a fatal blow, but it's a near fatal blow to these efforts. So yes, I think there was a sense of a lack of strategy. I think the South Caucasus is not a policy priority. It tends to be seen through the prism of other policy priorities. I think that's more clearly the case with regard to the US. With regard to the EU, there is a sort of lack of a clear theory about what the EU is and what the South Caucasus is to the EU. You have a range of different policy instruments, but a lack of a regional strategy. What we've seen for already many years is quite ad hoc and bespoke policies that reflect the lack of a unified interest, I think, for the EU and member states, which have obviously different relationships with Armenia and Azerbaijan and different stakes in the region. So yes, I think in that sense, it's not necessarily embedded in a clear strategy for the region. So I think in terms of advice, it's, I think, crucial to try to keep the interstate level negotiation afloat. There's a lot of concern about prospects for more violence, but I think there's also a need for some realism about what actually functions in this hyper realpolitik context. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Laurence. Yeah, not an easy, sorry, lay down immediately. Complex question, but thank you for starting us off. Areg, if I can turn to you, Armenia has been forced to react mostly, I'd say, in the past few years. The really room for maneuver and how much agency it has in shaping even if its own future has been really diminished after the 2020 war. And so within that, and with understanding that have been, again, very hard to be strategic there still have been, in my view at least, placed some very bets that didn't deliver. So 2018 to 2020 was an attempt to restart the negotiations from a clean slate in a way, moving away from Madrid principles and Lavrov plan. That certainly didn't work out. Since 2021, at least, there was an attempt to, I'm talking about foreign policy priorities specifically, right? There seemed to be a big bet put into normalization with Turkey that as of this summer seemed to also not deliver many results. And then now there is this very big realignment essentially and the turn away from Russia for perhaps understandable reasons, but towards the West. That does, I would say, require some commitment, long-term support by the West. And what we heard from Laurence, which I concur, I would agree with too. So at least from US perspective, it's a peripheral issue. Especially if we have a change of administration in the US, there would be very hard to predict what are the consequences, but even if with the current administration, right, so other issues continually will take priority. So is this a dangerous bet? And overall, how would you characterize the strategy? Is there a strategy or is it only a reaction?
Well, thank you. I think I will start my speech with the 2020 Second Karabakh War, and I will not go any further than that because it's a completely different logic prior to that. So the period we had after the 2020 war, starting from November until the April 2021, was a period when, as much as I understand, the political elite of Armenia was trying to do everything to satisfy Russia and taking any position that Russia would like, and giving the whole leadership to the Russian establishment, to the level when even the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the new government was reappointed according to the Russian taste, let's say. So until the April of 2021, the Russian positioning in Armenia was probably the strongest ever. But things started to change from the April 2021, and especially from the September 2022, when the direct Azerbaijani attacks happened already on the Armenian soil, on the territory of the Republic of Armenia, and Armenia applied for the assistance both through the CSTO and through the bilateral agreement with Russia, and it completely failed to get any attention. Yeah, if at the first point Russians just answered that they didn't get any sort of formal applying for assistance, during the second, the general line of Russia was, we don't really know where is the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan, while the clashes of September 2022 are everything but not a border clash. It was there were shelling of the cities on the eastern part of Armenia. There was an invasion to the territory of Armenia at some point with a penetration of 11 kilometers. So it was anything but not a border clash. So what's the Russian positioning was of course not serious. And starting from September 2022. Armenia decided to involve more actors and different actors than Russia, and to start a different process. So if the November 9 to 10 agreement was mostly and mainly about Karabakh, the new process, we can call it the Prague process. I've heard different names, but I think we can also call it Prague process. Was started with a different aim from the Armenian point of view, with the aim to guarantee the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Armenia. Now, while Russian side pointed out it as a turning point for the Karabakh issue, as a point when Armenia recognized Karabakh as a part of Azerbaijan, and thus anything that happened later was to be blamed to the Pashinyan's government and to the Prague process. I don't necessarily think it's a right point of view. The thing is, what was Karabakh according to November 9 to 10 agreement? What was the new status quo? What do we mean under this word, Nagorno-Karabakh, according to November 9 to 10 agreement? According to 9 to 10 November agreement, Karabakh basically meant that there is a group of people living on a particular territory which had rights connected to that territory, obviously under the sovereignty of Azerbaijan. So the November 9 to 10 agreement from the very beginning did not question whether Karabakh was a part of Azerbaijan or not. If you remember, Putin himself, during the signature process and after it, during his interviews, gave these speeches when he recognized Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. And the general understanding alongside the political elite was that it is what it is. It's not going to be any different or any better than this. We should try to maintain what's still possible and what was thought as possible was that there can be still a group of Armenians living in Karabakh under the sovereignty of Azerbaijan with particular rights connected to particular territory, aka some level of autonomy or some international guarantees of security and rights. Now this had nothing to do basically with the Prague process and the three principles to which the Prague process came to. Those three principles were basically highlighted in the Granada meeting. Those are the sides are recognizing each other's territorial integrity. They are obliged to do the delimitation and demarcation process according to the Almaty Declaration, which means to the administrative borders of the Soviet Union. And the third, the communications are going to be opened and exploded under the sovereignty and jurisdiction of each country. So those two papers or processes were pretty much differentiated from each other, and I don't think that it was the Prague process which killed the November 9 to 10 agreement or Karabakh generally. Now, what was Armenia trying to do? As I said, until April 2021, Armenia wasn't even didn't give enough attention, or if I may, any attention to its own territorial integrity and sovereignty issues, but rather to the rights of the Armenian population to Karabakh. But after the pushings, let's say, from Azerbaijan, this became an issue, and Armenia was forced to do that. And all of this is a reaction. None of this is a proactive policy. None of this is a strategy. These are some kind of tactics in policy, trying to secure what is possible to secure and trying to, shut the fire wherever and whenever it is possible to shut the fire. But what Armenian side lacks significantly is obviously the disbalance of power right now in Southern Caucasus. I would say that this is the biggest root of all other problems. And of course, it lacks management abilities to the situation. Another problem that occurred basically during this week is the situation when Azerbaijan doesn't recognize the Prague process or the the importance or the legitimacy of the Prague process. We have seen that Aliyev didn't came to Granada. Instead, he had gone to Tbilisi and suggested a new peace talks with the Georgian facilitation. Then we have seen today's announcement about Bishkek's meeting, when he was saying that the Russian mediation is the best mediation, basically, that Russia is a friend of Azerbaijan, it's a friend of Armenia, it's a local country, it's not thousands of kilometers away, it's much more logical to do it within the Russian mediation. Now, I can say how it is received here in Yerevan by two means. First of all, it is clear as day for Yerevan that Russia doesn't want to see the final resolution of the conflict. Thus, taking the resolution process back to Moscow is another step not to have the resolution of the conflict. That's first. And second, we came to something basically in Granada. We came to those three principles, which were the result of the Prague process, of all those negotiations. And now, basically, Azerbaijan tries to avoid those three principles and the legitimacy of those three principles. And as a final answer to your general question, Philip, obviously, whatever Yerevan is doing, it's not doing as a part of general strategy. I'm very doubtful that there is a general strategy regarding to the peace talks, regarding to the vector of the development of Armenia, be that Russia or West, regarding anything, you name it. It's much more of a reaction policy towards the problems and dangers in the region.
Oh, thank you, Areg. Zaur, turning to you, and if possible, since you are third speaker, also maybe taking into consideration everything we heard so far, right? So maybe they factor that in as well. The question for me is that Azerbaijan has been acting, positioning itself as a regional power rather than a small post-colonial state, kind of different, pretty different outlook or projection of its own image since 2020, and has been in particular quite an expansionist power, essentially. If before that all the talk was about compromise, territorial integrity, kind of some form of normative approach to the solution, and now it's very power-based approach. And essentially, also going off a bit of what Areg was saying, any agreement or any kind of attempt to normalize seem to be very short-lived, and the next step and next demand and escalation of was demanded of Armenia or Armenian sides are continually seem to the bar seem to be rising pretty much continually. So it's very hard to see where it could stop and where a normalization, where the line could be drawn, and some kind of normalization could be achieved. So that's the background I see, and I guess it's a question to you again from that same position I was asking. This was the strategy, and again, vis-a-vis not only Armenia but the bigger regional developments, if possible.
Thank you, Phil. Actually, in order to understand, Baku's strategy, I will go a little bit back. I will start also with the 2020 war. The 2020 war was as a result of 2020 war, so the Baku probably saw the three elements is in play. First of all, finding a language, not leverage, but language with Russia is working, and considering Russia is a regional power and also the monopolist power, but the power that you need to deal with. I think second was that these all normative powers are not working the last 25 years, and the war and the use of the force is, and if you achieve something, and this is something to give you, empower you, and force other side. And the third issue is that actually until the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Baku saw as a Russia is going to be monopolized this area, and this is the area that actually West is out. So this is understandable. This is in West, probably it was seen that actually Azerbaijan, as a result of 2020 war, led West to be out of this process, but Baku see that the West is out of the process, and West will legitimize the Russian peacekeeping forces. This was the perception in Baku. And definitely, there were concerns that Russia will make the region. Russia will use this the conflict for a longer time, because I think when we'll read this November statement of the President Putin in 2020, and it means that they would like to stay 20 to 30 years, and there was a concern in Azerbaijan that this will continue like a new form of the status quo for a longer time, 20 to 30 years. And there's a two-way: either we are going to deal with Russia with new compromise to find a language, as we did since 2015 and coming to the 2016, and right now we need a new language of Russia, might be transforming Russian forces in the region. The second understanding was that might be we also to test the Russian power in the region. So this was a two strategies, actually mix of strategy, and that's why this three escalation happened in 2022. Aimed to do this to this strategy, but at the same time we know that we saw the Western introduction to the region. Most of the time I think that they saw EU engagement as an ad hoc attempt. So it's not a well strategized, just an ad hoc attempt to help the sides to come to a deal and normalize the relations. But also from that time, I think Baku used as a forum shopping. So between the EU and between West and Russia. So and not to distract any of them, but using all of these capabilities and dealing with all three powers. The West, not only the EU, but also Washington. So many people have been surprised this escalation, military operation or offensive, which took one day, and in Baku it is seen right now that we are entering a new period. and this is the period that actually the issue is resolved, or it is likely that even we have a much more leverage, and Russian peacekeeping force is going to leave soon, might be before 2025 or later. So that's why it's also seen as a decreasing the pressure point by the Russians or others when it comes to Azerbaijan. The question is that everyone is asking, probably your question is that whether if there will be a deal between Baku and Yerevan, whether this will be leave or this will continue like this. So I think I see the risk. It's my personal expert opinion that I don't see that Baku can use of the force in Armenian territory. Might in a way that there is a concern in the Western community that Baku will take by force the region of the Sunik and then establish the connectivity, but because it will bring the more international condemnation, real isolation, and also sanctions. So that's why I'm personally excluding this scenario, but livability of this agreement depends on this when and how this deal will come into force. My understanding is that the steel, especially since the Lachin corridor in Lachin, Azerbaijan established a checkpoint, I think Baku starts showing that Baku doesn't need a peace agreement. So because it has effective control, and right now after the 20th September, I think this feeling that we don't need peace agreement anymore, that recognition by Armenia is actually much more stronger. However, I do still believe that actually still there is an interest coming to the agreement, but also resolving that. But also we should understand that peace agreement is just a framework agreement. It's going to be 2-3 pages of the agreement. It's not going to resolve an issue, and might be its livability depends on how the country is going to normalize. So I mean, this agreement in itself, if it's going to be international guaranteed, I have a less belief that this is going to be substantial how to normalize into two countries' relations. But still, having an agreement is better than not having an agreement. So that's why expansionist that as you described Baku's policy, I think is just the using of this opportunity, but I don't believe that there will be serious escalation. I mean, this expansionism will lead to the such a way that Azerbaijan is going to take any Armenian territory. So far, Baku described what is happening and what's doing in international recognize the border of Azerbaijan. Not going to the Granada and what Areg said about this Granada and the bilateral contact. I think there is two things. One is that right now there is a belief that in Baku that if you have a bilateral contact, if you organize our own meetings between President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan, this will also reduce the pressure points of between the West. We will not be in between the West and Russia. So as you know, that this when the EU is organizing meeting, it will bring condemnation, much more pressure from Russia, and so this is becoming a kind of the battlefield between the Western and the Russian power. So this is the one reason. The second reason is that I do believe that still there is a respect and a face to the EU-led process, or might be much more face to the United States intervention to the process. So still, I am little bit. I'm not so pessimistic about this prospect of the signing of the peace deal. And when we talk about these officials in Baku, they say that the main issue about the peace talks was about this rights and security of Karabakh Armenians, and this took much of the power of the two sides. Might be they actually discuss this topic more than other issues, and right now it seems that it's not going to be topic of this the discussion. But also I see the danger that there should be some way to stop, because there is also still rhetoric about this return of Azerbaijanis to Armenian territory. So in order to actually achieve the peace, and this topic shouldn't be, I do believe it shouldn't be part of the discussion on the or part of the peace deal. And this return of whole displacement, it depends also how to the things relations between two sides are going to normalize. So basically, still the West is here. Will continue, but also Baku has interest doing this bilaterally.
Thank you, Zaur. But the interestingly, we are simply painting a very different looking picture, right, from different angles. We are discussing. So before considering that, I want to check in before I go on with a couple of more questions. If there are any questions to each other you might have based on what you heard so far. If not, I'll go on. Okay. Feel free to. Yeah, Laurence.
I mean, I have it's a sort of a general observation. In your opening comments, you talked about how geopolitics seems to be driving the conflict and driving the processes. And yet at the same time, we see that Armenia and Azerbaijan are, in their different ways, exercising more agency and making choices in ways that we haven't seen for some time. And so I wonder whether this kind of, geopolitics dominates all the discussions about the South Caucasus. There is this relentless geopoliticizing of everything. And yet what we actually are seeing right now, one could argue, is much more of a nation-state agency being exercised. And it's almost as if that kind of geopolitical framing has collapsed in quite significant ways, and that has created a lot of space for maneuver. So, yeah, to what extent do we agree with that or not?
Alex, Zaur.
I do agree, because I mean this geopolitics was in the context of negotiation in the last 25 to 26 years also. I mean it was seen as a dependence or relying of the international mechanism or normative power to resolve the conflict. So that's why, as you described in your speech, that there was a rise and the fall of this intervention by West or the Russia, but Russia already monopolized this issue since 2008. So that's why I think there was a turn to the geopolitically to Russia more. At least what I can say from Azerbaijan perspective. But right now, since the main point of discussion, main issue was seen as a Nagorno-Karabakh, and what I see is that geopolitics is out of this process for Baku, at least right now. But what's the risk right now? I see that actually by design or by default, Armenia is becoming a battlefield between this geopolitics powers, West and Russia. But Baku feels that it's not a battlefield anymore, or there is no reason how so there could be this kind of thing. So Baku has a different language speaking with West and Russia. So it is working and it has a leverage. So that's why Baku is right now not a battlefield, let's say, to how to say between the geopolitical power. This is what I see briefly from Baku.
Well, obviously, any regional conflict has a seed of geopolitics in it. It's clear as day. The problem is the geopolitical clash we had right now in the South Caucasus. I totally agree with Zaur, is passing more of through Armenia rather than even the line of contact between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So it came further west, let's say, further to the territory of Armenia, but nonetheless, there is still a geopolitical conflict also around the resolution of the conflict. There are two completely different philosophies, basically, on the future resolution. One is the Russian philosophy, which is, in my opinion, a constant entity. It is, there should be no resolution. There should be the internal process of resolution, because it is one of the main anchors, let's say, of the Russian influence in our region. Plus, if there is a full resolution of the conflict, there is not a serious obstacle in the Armenian-Turkish resolution, which is another nightmare for Russia. So generally, the Russian approach is that the process is everything, result is nothing. While on the other hand, for the Western countries, aka the United States and the European Union mainly, it's vice versa. They want to see the resolution, not because the beautiful eyes of the Armenians, as we say here in Yerevan, or the beautiful eyes of the Azerbaijani, but because that would necessarily mean less Russia in our region. So yes and no. On one side, there is less geopolitics in the region because Azerbaijan got more power, it has the upper hand, etc. But on the other hand, there is still a big chunk of geopolicy because there are two completely different philosophical approaches to this issue. That's first. And the second, I would like to also make a comment on Zaur's thought on bilateral meetings. I do completely understand Azerbaijan's tendency to the bilateral meetings, and it is obvious the vice versa. Armenia's not readiness for the bilateral meetings. I personally would think that the idea of bilateral meeting was a brilliant idea back in 2010, 2009, latest is 2011. But starting from 2012, we have seen a significant disbalance of power. And whenever there is a disbalance of power and there is not a third party, or as you can call it, a facilitator, it's not a great idea for the weaker side or the easier hand to be involved in this kind of a bilateral agreements.
Thank you, Areg. Thank you, Zaur. A number of questions are coming in, focused on different scenarios where this could go, and someone was about essentially redrawing of international borders. The way questions are asked, I might rephrase to try to give a bit of a general question here. Right? So essentially, your point was that we shouldn't expect essentially whatever was happening from Azerbaijan's position was happening in territory of Azerbaijan. We don't need to expect. Shouldn't worry too much about Azerbaijan's attempt to redraw the international borders or sovereignty. But the question, I think, overall persists from different perspectives. There is also questions of enclaves or non-enclaves. Where are these borders? Again, where the lines could be pushed potentially into a place where essentially where the borders are questioned. So that's one line of question. Another one connects, again, it's a very different question, but let me try it immediately as well, is about Karabakh Armenians agency moving forward. And that's why I connect this, because I think it somehow does connect to the question of sovereignty as well. So the Karabakh Armenian agency, as in there is a question specifically about is there an intention to have some voice, in what form, right? So is a government in exile? Will it be based in Armenia? Will it be based abroad? Essentially, what's the next move potentially, or strategy if possible, for Karabakh Armenians, politically speaking, not only in terms of rights and integration in Armenia, but in terms of their potential future in Karabakh. Anybody would like to pick this up? Areg?
Yeah. So I'll comment on both issues. On the first one, I wouldn't share Zaur's opinion on this one. I think it's pretty possible that we will see a use of force against the territory of Armenia and the sovereignty of Armenia. First of all, it wouldn't be the first time as a political tool. It was used in 2021 and 2022. So basically the Rubicon is already passed. That's first. Second, regarding the idea that after that Azerbaijan will get huge Western reaction and then strong statements and then stuff. The strongest statement I ever remember from any mediator during the Karabakh issue was the statement by the Undersecretary Kim 2 weeks or even less, 1 week prior to the escalation in Karabakh, when Kim specifically said that they will not tolerate ethnic cleansing in Karabakh, they're saying that the launching corridor should be open now, with pushing her finger on the table and stuff. That was the strongest statement I ever remember. But a week later, there was the 23-hour war, and it was followed by the ethnic cleansing. So I don't think, more than that, the thing that United States warned that there will be consequences if a force is used against Karabakhi Armenians, and then force was used and there were no consequences, is the biggest green lighter for the further escalation. Because frankly, I think that during the last 2 years, the whole stability we had because of the United States role. I mean, the 2022 September clashes stopped thanks to the American involvement. Now, if Americans are not that much different from the Europeans and their warnings do not cost that much, the next escalation will not stop so easily by the American intervention. These are the basis why I think that the escalation is pretty possible. I would name namely three elements which would I call the peace, four elements, which would I call the peace process killers. And I think everybody understands that those are peace process killers. On the Armenian side, that is the raising the issue of the Karabakh Armenians or the status of Karabakh or whoever is connected to Karabakh to the state level. And here I also answer to the question, one of the questions, whether there should be an agency. I think there should be an agency, but it shouldn't be on the Armenian governmental level. Our Karabakh Armenians should create their own form of representation. It can be called the government in exile or whatever. And it would be great if it wouldn't be in Yerevan. That's true. But a peace process killer would be if those ideas or those statements or those narratives would be raised into the level of the government here in the Republic of Armenia. So that's the peace process killer on the Armenian side. What is the peace process killer on the Azerbaijani side? That's, first of all, I agree here with Zaur, the conversation about the return of the Azerbaijanis to the Armenia. If you put it in a peace treaty, come on, it's a possibility for the further escalation. Nobody says that this or that person should not have the right to live in this or that area, but to put it in a peace treaty, especially now after decades of hatred, propaganda, and stuff, necessarily means killing the peace process. So the two others are obviously the conversation about the enclaves, especially in the form how President of Azerbaijan have put it in his speech, as we will liberate them. That form of putting the sentence is pretty escalating, I would say. And obviously the third peace process killer is the conversation about the corridor. It is interesting that lately we don't see that much corridor conversations from Baku. We see much more from Ankara.
Thank you, Areg. Anybody else would want to react to this?
About this, I mean, use of the force, I will answer this question and also borders, the changing of the borders, this enclave question in two different ways. I mean, the one explanation is that when we talk about this 8 Azerbaijani village enclave inside Armenia, but also there is a one Armenian village inside Azerbaijan. So that's why, I mean, we heard a year ago that Baku proposed that there could be exchange of these territories, but in size, in similar size, so in equivalent way. I do believe that still it's an option, but why I say that is use of force, especially let's call it in its name. The use of force in international recognized borders is one thing, and the second is the territorial claim to other country and becoming an occupant is different things. There's two issues is in play. First of all, there will not be any domestic support for if there will be the Azerbaijani incursion, let's say occupation, if you call it this way, so Armenian territory in large. Second is that I mean international condemnation, isolation. I mean this is when it comes to local, domestic, international recognized borders. There's two different views, and when it is about the sovereignty of other countries, is different. It's not never tested. So in 2022, it was just a positional escalation. I mean Azerbaijan haven't took any. At least settlement. So this is what Baku said, that we never took the settlement. So how to look to this border delimitation and demarcation? I mean, I think there's a two choice. One is the maps, another one is that actually how to say regulation. So I think I opt more the regulation. It's not only maps, it's regulation, starting a process and accepting what we have right now as the status quo. So, or at least until this issue is going to be resolved, because delimitation will take a longer term. As second aspect, how I see the use of the force. First of all, let's say this Karabakh issue was about this manifest for Azerbaijan population for last 30 years and kind of ideology. So after what happened what happened after 20th September, the solution of the, let's say, self-proclaimed authorities and Azerbaijan effective control of the old Karabakh, it's actually end of this the journey of ideological make Karabakh as an ideological basis of Azerbaijan identity, and also Karabakh as an excuse for domestic the politics. So that's why there will be some uncertainty in the long term or the short term. So what comes next? A new enmity or a new ideology? This is the question. This is prevalent question in Azerbaijan. This is actually is going to be answered whether use of the force or the threat of the force will be also again component of the let's say foreign and security policy, or there will be new let's say ideology is coming in Azerbaijan, which actually replace which was a journey in the last 30 years. And there was the question also, part of the question about Iran. I see it in the comments. I think this the agreement made back to 2020. That time Azerbaijan officials, foreign minister of Azerbaijan described this as a diversification of the options of Azerbaijan when it comes to the connectivity. Mainland Azerbaijan is not an ex-slave. And second is that actually it was also aimed to reduce the how to say Iranian concern when it comes to connectivity, showing Iran that we are also considering Iran as a part of the regional framework. So this was aimed last year, but then escalatory tension between Azerbaijan and Iran actually made hard to make any movement about this this part of this the project. But there was also a risk, and still as a risk, that Iranian project, let's say how to connectivity through Iranian territory, is that we know that there will not be any investment coming from the West. It's not a less favorable project. It is not going to be seen by the international community largely as a how to say unblocking the region. So that's why still how to say connectivity through Armenia is a viable option. Also, with doing this, Iran, Azerbaijan is making a how to say show to Armenia that if we have an option. So I mean, if we are not going to agree about this how to say connectivity through Armenian territory, then Armenia will be Armenian routes isn't going to be unblocked. This is understanding, but still, I mean, a use of the force. My understanding, I might be wrong. This is a region actually you can be wrong with optimistic scenarios. So I think that I don't see as such a issue. Might be it's a threat of the force, but not a use of the force.
Laurence, if I can turn to you, there's this two-edged questions, or actually two sets of questions coming, very different. One is about on this last point of connectivity, and Monik was asking, is this Iran road potentially something that will take Armenia out of any kind of further opportunities to connect regionally? But I think the sub-question there from my end would be that essentially, is there a space for any kind of connectivity? Is the solution in some form of permanent or long-term isolation from each other, like wall in between of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and somehow living separate, or can they move towards some form of integration, starting from economic one, right, or the integration a danger, or attempt to essentially put roads a danger. And then there is this other question which I want to connect here, is again back to the third-party roles. The question is, given the power disbalance, is it even possible for Armenia and Azerbaijan to have any kind of an agreement that is not enforced by some kind of a third party? And then the third party, the way I'm connecting it here, because the more we are discussing, the third parties seem to be either as a problem or disinterested, essentially, right? So yes, US came in with strong statements, didn't seem to follow through, and overall the reliability is in question. The EU position seemed to be quite ad hoc rather than strategic, and so on. Russia's, whether it's a player who will support peace or not in principle, is in question. So it's not clear necessarily what is this third party. There isn't a normative basis right now for a solution, right? Seem to be, nor necessarily kind of political actor external who is interested in maintaining peace. So essentially, where is the parameters of potential connectivity, or is the mutual isolation a safer bet? Thoughts?
Well, obviously, who would want to advocate for long-term mutual isolation? The future is obviously in reconnecting the region, but as the other panelists have highlighted, there are just the different sort of sets of problems with the different corridor routes, and indeed this notion of a corridor, which I thought was always very problematic when we're talking about connectivity, because a corridor implies that you need some kind of safe access through enemy territory, whereas what's needed here is a quite different understanding. I think it's very interesting that the Zangezur corridor discourse has come and gone. It has sometimes been at high volume, at other times at low volume. The Iranian alternative has been mentioned before. And it seems to me that perhaps there is scope for a kind of illiberal regionalism to emerge. If Iran is brought into this kind of regionalization dynamic, I think you could argue that Iran essentially hasn't had a South Caucasus policy for the last 3 decades, and saw events and outcomes in 2020 as quite unsettling, and has been looking for a way to assert itself in the face of what it sees as a excessive Azerbaijani-Turkish alignment. And I think bringing Iran into that project could be a way for the 3 regional powers to align with one another. The problem then is, as Zaur highlighted, what role would the West play? Coming back to the West's capacities and leverage, it's pretty much always been about positive incentives. It's been about paying for connectivity. We've seen that in different statements from Charles Michel after the different meetings, setting up of an economic council, and so on. So I think, this is the kind of the dilemma of these 2 different projects. For the transit route across Armenia to be viable and to attract the necessary investment, you really need a serious and credible commitment, long-term commitment to Armenian-Azerbaijani stability. I wanted to pick up on what Zaur was saying about ideology. I think we can see this very kind of strong revival of Turkophilia. It was always there, of course, in Azerbaijan, but it's been heavily reinforced. Where do you see that going? What could be the post-conflict legitimacy formula for President Aliyev? Can he rebrand himself as a statesman bringing peace and development to the region? And how could that work when you've basically seen a kind of a mobilization society which is mobilized around this conflict at so many different levels? How plausible could such a transformation be? So that's a question to you. And on the point about third parties, I absolutely agree with what Areg was saying earlier, and I wrote about it in a recent comment for Chatham House. Russia's policy has been irresolution of the conflict, to maintain this source of leverage as far as possible. And I think what's remarkable about the last month is that we've seen the abandonment of that policy. And the abandonment came a bit earlier, but we've seen the outcomes of that. I always thought that up to 2020, the one source of consensus in Armenia and Azerbaijan was not wanting to see a Russian monopoly on the peace process for the reasons that you highlighted, Areg. I think, the West's effort has been appreciated as a kind of diversification of mediation. But I also think the EU effort has been pitched not in that overarching framework of something like the Minsk group. The EU has depicted itself as a facilitator of Armenian-Azerbaijani talks. So this is a process that does have to be owned in the end by Armenia and Azerbaijan. The discussion about relocating to Georgia, I think, it sounds great in principle, but what really matters is, I think, the content of what's going to be agreed rather than the form or the venue. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Though, again, I also has been always an advocate of Armenia-Azerbaijan is to eventually solve this directly. But I think the question of pretty major power disbalance does put a question mark on how sustainable it is, if it's even possible, without some form of balancing act there. That is where I started. Right now, I'm a bit more hesitant if the direct negotiations could yield very sustainable results.
It raises the issue of, whether we can have an indigenous concept of peace. Mm-hmm. When you look at it historically, regimes of peace have always been brought in from outside and imposed in a way on the region, whether you're talking about communism and the Bolsheviks and their ethno-federal conflict resolution setup, by agreement also with Kemalist Turkey in the 20s, whether you're talking about the liberal imperialism, if you will, of the unipolar world order, the liberal world order in the face of the Minsk group in the 1990s. And one could argue this regionalization dynamic that is dominated by the regional powers today. And so, these different regimes of peace are always bringing in external agendas and interests into the already extremely contentious basket of issues between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. And what we also see is that violence flares when those hegemons who introduced peace regimes weaken and decline. That has been true, obviously, in the late 1980s with the Soviet Union, and true with the passing of the unipolar order, and one could argue true with Russia's decline and distraction since February 2022. So, that experience of externally mediated peace enforcement in the region, or introduction, imposition of peace ideas and ideologies from outside has never actually worked. And there is a lot that we don't really know or understand well about those efforts by community leaders, Armenian Azerbaijani community leaders, to discuss deconfliction and de-escalation in the early 20th century. And I think, one of the things that peace-building initiatives are trying to do is to arrive at a more indigenous discussion and a more local discussion about peace and war.
Thank you. But not to miss this other important point raised before, and then a couple of other questions are coming up. But Zaur, maybe Laurence also had this question too. If you want to elaborate a bit more, as in what that non-enmity-based identity could look like, because what we talk about Armenian and Azerbaijani identities, at least since the collapse of the Soviet Union, including state identities, have been very heavily based on this conflict. Essentially, these states formed through the Nagorno-Karabakh war. On the Armenian end, it's a little question that will probably continue, as in more reasons essentially to continue. There is no need almost to rethink. If anything, the enmity has been reinforced. For now, there's no question of what's this Armenian identity. Again, unfortunately, it will continue to be based on enmity with Azerbaijan and Turkey for the foreseeable future. But what do you see potentially in the alternative in Azerbaijan? Essentially, the obvious alternative is simply turn the enmity further towards Armenia itself, right? What could be the other version?
That's a good question. So I mean, this Karabakh issue and the humiliation, the loss of the territories since the first war was a driving force at the same time, because also there was a displaced people, large number of displaced people, because it was something actually keep this alive, this issue. So I mean, you can have a different project. Let's say you can call that let's say we will have a Turkic republics, but it's not going to be sound. It's not going to affect population. It's not going to be the driving force. But when you have a displaced people, this was also that's why this was such a huge issue, how to say driving force and part of the identity. But at the same time, it was an issue for the traditional opposition to criticize the government, so to challenge the government. At least the last few years, it was the only option for opposition to challenge the government and to make them to be weak, especially even after 2020 war. So because a new accusation was that we are not controlling everything, there's a Russian. So that's why we are seeing end of the period, not only the end of this the Karabakh as a part of ideology, also Karabakh as a tool. either for opposition, also for government. So that's why the question is what will be new? Many can assume that might be new enmity will be driving force. I'm less. I don't think so, because I mean after 30 years, 35 years, taking into account all of these things happen, I don't think that this is going to be a sound or impact or population in large and will be driving force. So that's why I'm very I don't believe that this is a scenario, but much more will depend how the next how to say move will be, and how and this is because after 2020 war we have also the expectation that they will be also President Aliyev has a full legitimacy, authentic one. He can make a big reform and change the country, and the similar things is right now sounding, or expectation is coming in Azerbaijan domestically, that might be it's also end of this conflict, so might be we need a new identity. But as far as I know, this question is also discussing in different ways and forms inside the government, also outside the government, in public, but there is no definite answer for now. But I don't believe that other geopolitical projection, if you put it either related to Armenia or Iran and Azerbaijanis, it's not going to work as it worked for the Karabakh issue, because Karabakh issue was different.
Fair enough. Interesting observation, yeah, because again, a lot of the thinking has been that if it continues to be built on enmity, then the war will never stop. But also can see, yes, the difficulty of maintaining it in the current environment. Maybe one more set of questions on the human security end of the conversation. Essentially, all of this today intentionally we framed it as geopolitical conversation, but of course we do have pretty serious problems. Just 2 weeks ago, 100,000 people have been displaced overall throughout the 30 years. None of this has been solved. So, anybody displaced practically never had a chance to return. That we have still prisoners of war, captive people in Azerbaijan, plus a new round of people, this time political. So how do we see, any thoughts on how these questions could be addressed? Because there is, in a way, two versions. Yeah, one is more normative version, as in should be done in form of some kind of human rights or international law provisions, whether it's restitutions or fair trial or what else, or the right of return, probably. Let me put that on top of the list as well. Or it's a straight realpolitik, and the power wins, and we need to accept and move on. So thoughts on this, as in is there a space essentially for introduction or reintroduction of some form of normative approach to addressing the humanitarian and human security questions? Areg, I haven't heard from you for a while.
If I may, and after the answer, I beg your pardon, I will have to leave because of the meeting. Yeah. I think it is in our best interest to have as few points of further escalation after the peace treaty. And I'm referring to the prisoners of war issue. I think it will be in the best interest of the peace treaty itself to cover also this issue, to exchange every single POW on one side with the same on the other side, and this should include also the leaders of the self-proclaimed Republic of Karabakh. Because on the other hand, this will be another point of escalation, both on public opinion and possibly also on the political arena. That's first. And regarding the situation with the 100,000 displaced people, the ethnically cleansed people, I think that nobody is romantic enough in Armenia to think about their ability to go to Karabakh anytime soon. I don't think any of those people will make a decision to go to Karabakh anytime soon. The only possibility for that, I think, is the creation of some kind of international mechanism with R2P, right to protect. And I don't see that happening anytime soon in this current logic on the territory. So there is no chance for return of those people. What can be done, on the other hand, is to create some bearable conditions for those people to live here in Armenia. I think that's the bare minimum that the government in Armenia, together with our partners in the West, should do, because next most possible option is for them to migrate to Russia, which is the worst scenario, both for them and for Armenia, in my opinion, because sadly, Russia is the destination where Armenian identity is being lost the quickest, even compared to many Muslim or Western countries. But I would also refer back to one of the points I made previously. I think that Karabakh Armenians should self-organize and create some entity that will represent them, and will continue the fight for their rights and for their and will voice them, let's say.
Thank you. Thank you, Areg. Zaur, Laurence, and thoughts on?
Yeah, about I will start with about this the how to say this humanitarian issue, especially the detainees. We know that we have a detainees in Azerbaijan, Armenia detainees. Also, there's two Azerbaijanis in Armenia. So actually, this should be issue should be resolved easily as a part of peace agreement or before the peace agreement. I mean, it should be, because there was a discussion even in July that there will be a release of all detainees by both sides. But I think Baku is going to see this the former de facto leaders of the Karabakh Armenians differently than the detainees actually detained since 2020, end of the 2020 war. So and we know that there are 9 people. As we know that before, Baku announced that they have a list of the 400 people wanted list, but ended up with arresting of the 9 people. I don't think that there is a way of might be 1 or 2, but there's no way that there will be any time of soon of the releasing of these people, because they will be open court, and Baku accusing them for wrongdoings in the first war and second war, especially the 3 former de facto leaders of Karabakh Armenians. As we remember, Phil, we discussed a year ago, might be more than a year ago, that transitional justice should be part of the peace negotiation, peace agreement, because everyone's reference is the 90s and what happens now in this. Without healing this process, I think it will be hard. It might be they are going to sign the peace agreement, but they will not be healing of the process of this 2 sides. There is also issue of the missing people from both sides. Number is huge in Azerbaijan side. At the same time, for peace agreement, as Areg said, there is also issue of court cases. So imagine that right now the 2 countries are how to have a court case, but also they will be there is a chance of having a more court cases. So this should be also end with this. The peace agreement, return of the Karabakh Armenians. So because it opens the sets of the issues, return or not return. If at least there is also agency property issues. There is the issue of the cultural heritage. So I mean, it's not might be full return integration, but also having a chance to visit. Might be I don't. I mean, this question that actually I don't have any data to say that whether what's the feelings. Probably we saw the feelings coming from last 30 years. There is a less. No one is expecting that huge number of the people will return, but in order to make things with international standards, there is a need, might be involvement of the international United Nations Refugee Agency, because it should be safely, voluntarily and dignified way of return, and applying of the UN principles of this issue, as all issues about this people, who would like to return or who would like not to return, because also they will be property issue. But the question is that who and how they're going to discuss. As we know that this process started about the 3 meetings held between Azerbaijan and Karabakh Armenians, but it stopped right now. We don't know whether there will be any new meeting. So that's why the question that you asked in the beginning of the meeting, that what will be agents of the Karabakh Armenians, who will be community leaders, how they're going to represent themselves. This is going to be question for a long time.
Thank you, Zaur. Yeah, Laurence, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, a lot's been said. Obviously, agree that the issue of detainees should be solved as part of a framework agreement. Similarly, I think there are all the conditions in place now to effectively investigate and, as far as possible, resolve all of the missing persons cases. This has been a huge issue with, I believe it's about 3,890 still unresolved cases in Azerbaijan from the first war, and somewhere in the region of 780 odd on the Armenian side. Those numbers, the numbers in 2020 are very small in comparison, but still between 200 and 300 people on the Armenian side. And I think there are going to be a lot more missing persons cases emanating from the one-day war on 19th, 20th of September. But I think, now with Azerbaijan in control of all of these territories, where many of these missing persons cases the bodies, the remains can be assumed to be lying, then I think we could see cooperation, we could see resolution of these cases, and potentially even as a confidence building measure, Armenian monitors at sites, since obviously sites could reveal missing persons of either nationality. So opportunity to see some cooperation there. On the imprisonment of Nagorno-Karabakh Republican officials, it's my sense that there are obviously a range of different charges here. There are charges related to alleged war crimes in the 2020 war. And then there's a sort of a different set of charges around participation in an unrecognized republic. We should remember that the officials of the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic were mentioned in the original mandate of the OSCE as the elected representatives of the Karabakh Armenian community, who were mandated to participate along with the other representatives, meaning the Karabakh Azerbaijanis. So, I think the optics of putting the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic on trial per se could be negative and could have a very negative resonance for the wider peace environment. And that would also be the case if there are only people from one side who face justice for war crimes. With regard to return of Karabakh Armenians and indeed Azerbaijani refugees from Soviet Armenia in the late 80s, there's enormous pressure to take a normative stance, and I think we will see a lot of normatively oriented statements about this. But the reality is, those statements are really divorced from the realities, and we have discussed some of them. The enmity formula, the enemy image, and so on. It's problematic if you are proposing to return refugees whose community expresses an irredentist ideology vis-a-vis the communities to which they would be returning. And those communities have been mobilized at every level to see returnees as the fifth column of a hostile power. So, obviously we would want everybody to be able to exercise a right of return who wishes to do so, but it would need to happen under a very different constellation of politics and of political culture. I'll stop there.
So thank you once again for participating, and we look forward to another chance to talk.